There is a category of building in American cities that is simultaneously protected from demolition and unprotectable from financial failure, and the mechanism that connects those two outcomes is the historic preservation designation, the legal status that prevents an owner from altering, demolishing, or significantly modifying a building whose architectural or historical significance a government authority has determined to be worth preserving for the public benefit. The historic designation sounds like protection. It is for the building's physical fabric. What it does not protect is the building's financial viability, and in the specific cases this episode examines, the historic designation's restrictions on physical modification have prevented the very renovation that would have made the building financially viable in its current market, producing the paradox in which the protection designed to preserve a building's significance is the mechanism preventing the investment that would preserve its economic existence. The paradox operates through a specific mechanism. Historic designation restricts the types and extent of physical modification that an owner can make to the designated building, typically requiring that exterior facades, significant interior spaces, and specific architectural features be preserved in their original or near original condition. Those restrictions can prevent the installation of the mechanical systems, the window replacements, the floor-to-ceiling height modifications, and the floor plate reconfiguration that converting an older building to contemporary Class A office, residential, or hotel use requires. When the cost of renovation within the preservation restrictions exceeds what the renovated building can achieve in rental income or sale value, the historic designation has made the renovation economically irrational, not because the renovation is impossible, but because the restrictions on its scope have made the renovation cost higher than the renovation's value. The building is protected. The building is unfinanceable. Both are true. Subscribe now because this is the episode that explains why the most architecturally significant buildings in your city are also the most financially precarious. The economics of historic building renovation are a specific subset of the broader commercial real estate renovation economics that this channel's analytical episodes have examined, with the additional constraint that the preservation designation introduces. The renovation must achieve contemporary market performance standards while respecting the physical characteristics that the designation was enacted to protect. The tension between those two requirements is case-specific but structurally predictable. Older buildings whose architectural significance is expressed primarily through features whose removal or modification would violate the historic designation, double-hung windows that provide inadequate thermal performance, floor plates that predate the open-plan office format, ceiling heights that limit mechanical system installation options, typically require either more expensive renovation solutions or compromised market performance outcomes. The more expensive renovation solution addresses the tension directly. Design a renovation whose mechanical, electrical, and plumbing systems work within the existing architectural constraints rather than modifying the constraints to accommodate the systems. These solutions exist. They are sophisticated. They are expensive, typically 20 to 40% more expensive per square foot than equivalent renovations in buildings without preservation restrictions. The compromised market performance outcome is the alternative. Renovate within the preservation restrictions at standard cost and accept a building whose market performance reflects the constraints that the historic features impose. Smaller floor plates, lower ceiling heights, inferior window performance, rather than the contemporary market standard that the most competitive buildings in the same market achieve. The specific financial failure case this episode documents is the case where neither solution is viable, where the more expensive renovation cost exceeds what the building's market performance can support in rental income or sale value, and where the compromised market performance outcome produces revenues insufficient to service the renovation financing. When both solutions fail simultaneously, the historic designation has created a building that is architecturally significant, legally protected, and financially impossible to renovate. A building in stasis, maintained at its current condition by owners who cannot afford to leave it as is and cannot afford to fix it. The Pennsylvania Station demolition in 1963 is the event that produced the modern American historic preservation movement, and it is the event that explains why historic designations frequently create financial liabilities rather than resolving them. Penn Station was demolished because its owner, the Pennsylvania Railroad, had determined that the building's maintenance costs exceeded its income generation capacity, and that the air rights above the station were more valuable as a development site for Madison Square Garden than the station itself was as a transportation hub. The railroad was not wrong about the financial calculation. It was wrong about the public and institutional response to the demolition, which produced a preservation movement whose legislative expression, the New York City Landmarks Law of 1965, created the Systematic Designation Authority that has since protected hundreds of buildings from similar demolitions. The Landmarks Law's specific financial mechanism is the creation of a legally protected status whose enforcement imposes costs on the designated building's owner that the market does not compensate directly. The cost of maintaining the building to the standard the designation requires, the cost of complying with the designation's restrictions in any renovation or modification, and the opportunity cost of the development that the designation prevents. Those costs are not uniformly prohibitive. Many historic buildings are financially productive despite their designation, and the designation's restrictions do not uniformly create the renovation impossibility this episode documents. The designation creates a liability specifically in the cases where the building's highest and best use requires a physical modification that the designation prohibits. The most common version of this liability in contemporary American cities is the conversion of older Class B or Class C office buildings to residential use. The office-to-residential conversion has been the dominant repositioning strategy in downtown office markets that were disrupted by the COVID-19 pandemic's acceleration of remote work adoption, producing systematic excess supply of older office space in markets whose residential demand remains strong. Historic designations prevent office-to-residential conversions in the specific cases where the conversion would require facade modifications, window replacements, or other alterations that the designation's protection covers. Exactly the cases where the economic rationale for conversion is strongest, because the buildings most likely to be designated are the buildings whose architectural quality makes them most appealing as residential addresses. The financial resolution available to a historically designated building whose renovation economics are unworkable has a specific structure in American real estate: the historic tax credit, a federal tax incentive that provides a 20% credit against the cost of a qualified rehabilitation of a certified historic structure, funded by the federal government as a subsidy for the renovation economics that the preservation designation has made challenging. The historic tax credit was created precisely because Congress recognized that historic designations create financial liabilities for building owners, and that those liabilities, without subsidy, would produce either building abandonment or litigation challenging the designation's constitutionality as an uncompensated taking of property value. The historic tax credit has funded successful renovations of thousands of historically designated buildings across the United States, and its availability has resolved the renovation economics problem in many cases where the preservation restrictions alone would have made the renovation financially impossible. It has not resolved the renovation economics problem in all cases. The 20% credit is insufficient when the renovation cost premium exceeds 20% of the total renovation budget, which is the specific condition that produces the stasis this episode describes. In those cases, the building owner is left with an asset that is architecturally significant, legally protected, financially unviable as is, and financially unviable to renovate even with the available subsidy. An asset whose stasis the owner will maintain until the historic tax credit is increased, the market moves sufficiently to close the gap, a creative financing solution is assembled, or the building deteriorates to the point where emergency intervention allows modifications that the designation would otherwise prohibit. The most architecturally significant buildings in American cities are frequently in this condition. They are the buildings that visitors photograph and preservation advocates celebrate and developers avoid. They are protected. They are liabilities. Both are true simultaneously, and the gap between those two facts is where the architecture becomes a balance sheet problem. This content was developed using artificial intelligence tools as part of the research, writing, and production process. All AI-generated material was subject to human review, editorial intervention, and approval before publication.